I'm Jim Parody, head of the program in Writing and Humanistic Studies. Tonight we have one of the pioneers of information visualization, Professor Ben Schneiderman, with us. He will be addressing the subject Visual Overviews for Cultural Heritage, Interactive Exploration for Scholars in the Humanities, Arts, and Beyond. Given the topic of the evening and our locus in MIT's Morse Hall, amidst the curious murals of Edwin Holland Blashfield, painted in 1923 and 1930, I thought I should at least note that we are surrounded by some impressive personifications, a most ancient form of visualization. To the north, we have Alma Mater, the symbol of victory in her right hand, and a personification of book knowledge to her right, and a personification of experimental learning on her left. With all her young acolytes saluting her figures of agriculture, biology, chemistry, design, electricity, geology, history, mathematics, metallurgy, and physics. And to the south, this side, we have on the right panel, humanity emerging from the darkness, led by knowledge and invention. The more somber left panel shows the lab-coated scientists between two vases representing the benefits and dangers of the proverbial knowledge of good and evil. Whether these personifications are to your taste or not, they remind us of the humanistic mission of so much visualization. Its power to fix, concentrate, and situate on a human scale that which is complicated or abstract. Ben Schneiderman is also, among many other things, a most distinguished fixer, concentrator, and situator, and truly an artist as well as a technologist. He has far too vast a range of accomplishments for me to attempt any summary of here. Concepts of information design and management we associate with him include direct manipulation interfaces, hyperties, star field, the visible human explorer, lifelines, tree maps, and universal usability, to name only a few. His work ranges from database design, human factors in computer systems and information design, to user interface design and technology-mediated social participation. Professor Schneiderman is a designer of design systems with a vision of computing technology centered on its users, a new computing that empowers people and supports what people want to do. His book, Designing the User Interface, Strategies of Effective Human-Computer Interaction, has appeared in numerous editions and had a profound impact as an educational and professional text. His book, Leonardo's Laptop, Human Needs and the New Computing Technologies, was winner of the IEEE USA Award for Distinguished Contributions Furthering Public Understanding of the Profession. He is a fellow of the Association for Computing Machinery, of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, has received the ACM Sig Chi Lifetime Achievement Award, and he is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. Please welcome Ben Schneiderman.
Whoa, that was very kind and very wonderful sort of opening, with hard to top the visualizations on the wall that are around me, and appreciate that introduction, as well as the opportunity to speak here. It's something of a challenge for me, but it's one I welcome, and so I hope you'll be gentle with me, but I do look forward to a lively discussion. As you've seen, I'm from the University of Maryland and very happy to represent the 27-year-old Human-Computer Interaction Lab, which is a joint effort of computer science and information studies, psychology, sociology, political science, and the wonderfully titled Maryland Institute for Technology and the Humanities, MITH. And I hope many of you know Neil Freistad and Matt Kirschenbaum. Matt won the MLA Book Award with his book on mechanisms this year. Come visit our website with 450 papers, 200 videos, 40 pieces of software, or come visit us. I've put down some of our flyers. Next Thursday, Friday is our annual symposium for a couple of days. So, and you mentioned kindly enough the book, Designing User Interface, which is now in its 5th edition. And so that has been a way of telling the story. Now, I feel also there's other forms of context. Of course, that's an important term in this community. But you should know a little bit about me, in that while I have this technical background, I became, I'm pleased to say, I say 20% of an experimental psychologist, and maybe 2% of a sociologist, and maybe, I hope, at least 2% of a digital humanist. Those topics are really important to me. My parents were journalists in France in the 30s, in the Spanish Civil War, came to New York in the 1940s at a tough time. My sister is a professor of English. My uncle, David Seymour, is a renowned photographer and founder of Magnum Photos that was mentioned. This afternoon's sessions were a great introduction to a lot of the things I'm going to mention today. So my form of rebellion in that family, of course, was to become a computer scientist. But I've always had the rich sense of the connectedness between the sciences and the humanities. The focus for tonight and for this workshop, this conference, is about information visualization. And that became the centerpiece of my own attention. And it's characterized in this book with Stu Card and Jock McInlay. And the subtitle is Stu Card's wonderful one, Using Vision to Think, that our eyes are not merely input devices that are somehow just a mechanism for bringing data, but they're a way of thinking and of solving problems. And so that really became the issue in the last 20 years, to try to design technologies that would allow information, not scientific visualization, which has a well-established 50-year history, but to focus on information, those things that are not visible. Not visible. That is the relationships between people in this room, which countries you come from, which universities you're in, what your backgrounds are, what languages you speak. I'd like some, rich glasses to give me a view to see where the clusters are, who the outliers are, what are the related tightly clustered groups, and so on. So that's what we're working on. Other things have temporal patterns, whether they're the temporal pattern in poems or the temporal patterns in weather or stock market information. And we're interested not just to view it, but to understand, like, if IBM goes up, does Intel stock go up or does it go down? What are the relationships? And those tools have been used by digital humanities people in studying texts, which, after all, have a sequential temporal view. I was very much influenced by Marshall McLuhan. It really focused my life very much, and his acceptance of a more eclectic approach, an interdisciplinary one, was really important in stabilizing my own view of what I wanted to do in my life. So we're after things like trends, clusters, gaps, and outliers, and our tools to work with it are the design variables, the retinal variables of color, size, shape, and proximity. And the game is really wide open about how to do that correctly. So we've seen a lot of examples already in this conference of some good and some bad ones. And I guess the point I decided in the afternoon, revising these slides, to put a couple of flags down here, that we're really, the afternoon's talk, a lot of it, not all, but a lot of it was about presentation and things that were on paper. They were made permanent by the author, the constructor of the visualization. Very much the Tufte view. And Tufte's a dear colleague, a great respect, but he's more about, the permanent image, high resolution on paper. And my emphasis has been much more the user experience. Okay? So I'm going to focus here, and I sort of heighten that in my talk here. And maybe that's characterized by, oh dear, I even made a typo. You see, while I was going so quickly, I just got it wrong. So we'll just fix that right over here. So a picture is worth 1,000 words. But an interface, which is the subject of my work, is worth 1,000 images. Okay? I think that's the distinction. When I look at information visualization, it's not just the image, but it's the control panel. It's what the user does. It's the human experience. And what we're talking about is the distinction made nicely this afternoon by several of the speakers between discovery and presentation. I think it was Nick Montfort who showed the rover and the old projector, right? Is Nick, where's Nick? Yeah, there you go. Thank you. That was a great example, but that really characterized the difference. And what I'm advocating, and it's tough to advocate in the computing and the technical world, but the empowerment of users. That's ultimately what I want, those works that you cited, what they do is they empower people. The link empowers someone to click and find more information at their own choice, at their own time, at whatever depth of knowledge they want to pursue. And so that's the distinction here, and maybe we can say in a happy way they're complementary, that our work has been much more of the dynamics of interaction, the experience of the user, the empowerment. And others have done nicer jobs on presentation. Our work has occasionally been faulted by people who suggest they're not pretty enough, they're not aesthetic. But they do support, I hope to show you, that exploration. And I believe firmly that those principles are applicable across not just the scientific and technical worlds, but through the humanities, arts, and so on. So already mentioned, we've worked on many projects. The first interactive exploration of the visible human for National Library of Medicine, for NASA's environmental data, for the Bureau of Census statistical data, and then for the 70 government agencies that enable citizens to find what they need and then understand what they find in these large statistical data sets. But I think the highlight and maybe the most well-known piece is Spotfire, which I was pleased was Joanna Drucker. Where's Joanna? I'm ready for showed hello example of in the work of Catherine Plaisant. This is an example, a rare moment of a discovery captured in one image. Usually discoveries are a process, but here Nick Thomas of GE Healthcare in England made the discovery that the RBP1 gene, highlighted here, and here, was far more active than anyone expected in these biological processes of cell formation, and that they played a key role in the formation of retinol, which in turn supported embryonic development and supported human vision. And these dynamic query sliders that Joanna mentioned, and others did as well, these double box sliders let you control and explore the data in rich multidimensional ways. And we're pretty good in the space of 5 to 50 dimensions of data. We can do a couple of hundred, but it gets hard after that. Now, Joanna's critique says, well, someone selected those sliders, and therefore it fixes and limits what users can do, and that's always true. Any device has its limitations as well as its openings. Any telescope which lets you see in the visual spectrum doesn't let you see in the infrared or let you see X-rays. X-rays are different from infrared and from normal light. So these things are the choice, but they're the choice of the user as to which data items to take a look at and how to explore them. So I'm not going to do a demo of it, but I'm very satisfied that our paper in 1994 led to the company Spotfire in 97. It grew to 200 people in 2007 and was purchased by TIBCO. Now, Spotfire is used on very high-end, complex things with lots and lots and lots of data. Here's 27 windows worth, and it's still not enough. And that's where the direction is of people are getting more visual, as the theme of this conference is. And there are many ways this is happening at the desktop, and people moving from the 10 megapixel to the 100 megapixel environments to be able to explore lots of data. So let me give you an idea of what I mean by the interactivity of it. This is the nice PhD work of Harry Hochheiser, and it's called Time Searcher. I'm using a very simple data set. It's actually, in this case, stock market data. It's 13 months of data. It's 223 stocks. Some go up, some go down, some jiggle around, some are uneven, some are straight, and so on. So does anybody see anything interesting in this overview? We'll see all 223 at once. Here's your moment. That blip in the middle, right, thank you, that's right. It looks like February, if you may have trouble reading it there, is a highly volatile month. It's got this peak and bottoms there. So we grab the time box and we select the peak. Let's look at that first. And we immediately, by the user taking that action, they're looking at one component of this larger complex problem, and they see that all these stocks that went up then went back down in March. However, this tooltip gives me the details on demand. One stock, Adaptive Broadband, I hope you can see it, rose ahead of everybody else in January. Now, what's going on? I mean, These tools don't tell you why. They don't propose causality, but they do reveal things that are hard to see in other, hard to see under the normal situation. So did the investors have some clue or something that they knew before everybody else? Were they especially wise, or was it just a coincidence? We don't know, but at least it's sort of the clue that lets us form hypotheses and go exploring. So, sorry about that. I can grab this. We could look at the bottom, but the bottom is not so well defined. There are many other things we could do. I'll just be brief in this 1-minute demo. Our gene experts and our stock market people both had the same question: what starts low and finishes high? So, and do those things go steadily up, or do they jump around? Well, we could do that, and we can create richer patterns. Another common problem is what goes up and stays up. Okay? Those kind of patterns were also interesting to many of our diverse users, including humanities scholars, as I'll show in a moment. And you can take this pattern and explore rapidly, incrementally, and reversibly for different times of the year at different price points. And then what our gene expression people, our literary analysts, and our stock market people said, well, what are the things that go opposite? How do I find the opposite? So Harry built that, and it just flips it over. Okay? So the capacity in a tenth of a second to try out something and explore is the gift that we see as so valuable. The enrichment, not the answer to anything, but the capacity to ask a much larger number of questions in a shorter amount of time. Can we ask every question? Of course not. We're limited by the tool to what questions that we can ask. But we feel we've greatly expanded the scope of questions that people can ask about this data. Let me pause before I leave this. Any questions about this?
What's the name?
Called Time Searcher. It's free to download on our website. And you give it a try. It's Time Searcher 1. There's Time Searcher 2, which has some more features on it. But I guess I want to come back here and just say Tanya Clement, a PhD student in English at Maryland in Myth, used Time Searcher to analyze the patterns of words in Moby Dick, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and most notably The Making of Americans, Gertrude Stein's very difficult to read book with high degrees of repetition, which are a challenge to interpret. And she, I think, with this tool and other tools that we provided, was able to make fresh interpretations which were not accessible to previous scholars because of the extremely complex, repetitive nature of the text and the long, long sentences that go on. Sometimes sentences as long as 36 words were repeated throughout the text, but slight variations appeared, and those were really tricky to tell. And the normal scholar trying to match those up would spend many hours finding those patterns, which could be found in seconds in here. So you might look at the work of Tanya Clement. We went on and built a richer system with more data and more rich search capabilities. I think I'll go past this because my time's short. And then, particularly for scholars, we built Feature Lens, which combined data mining techniques which we thought were very dangerous and proved to be very difficult to interpret, with a visualization tool that will allow you to search for patterns and keywords. Here we're looking at the 7 or 8 State of the Union speeches of George Bush and what terms like Saddam Hussein were particularly popular in certain years and not in other years. There are some dramatic spikes which we're able to find, like Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction occurred dramatically in 2003 and then disappeared completely. Words like budget and taxes were high in the beginning and then dropped off. 2 words appeared in every speech once and only once. Can you guess? Well, it's a bit tough. Bless and Cheney. So some speechwriter made sure that, those phrases were in there once, but only once in each one of the speeches. So Feature Lens does let you explore in richer ways and combines pattern searching so you can find spikes or sinks, drops or rises, terms that remain constant, and we were able to find new patterns in things like the State of the Union speeches and literary texts as well. This was from Tanya's work. This was in The Making of Americans, word frequencies by chapters. So she was searching on a variety of them. These color codings show you when certain words appear, and so that gives you a way to click on it and then see the details and read the text in detail, in greater depth. Okay, so the lesson of this, the kind of story that I become sort of identified with, was I wrote this phrase one day in a paper in 96 was published, and it was overview first, okay? Oh, each line represented one project where we struggled for weeks or months to make a design that was effective for our problems, and that's what it turned out in every case. Provide a visual overview of the entire data set. Let the user see it on one screen without scrolling all at once. Let them see the pattern in some abstracted way. Now, there isn't only one overview. There are many kinds of overviews. But let them see what's there, what's not there. Let them see the clusters and the gaps and the patterns and the relationships as much as you can. Then allow the user to zoom in on what they want, filter out what they don't want, and then click for details on demand. Now, this is not a strong design rule. It's a rather lightweight, generic kind of pattern in the pattern language sense, but it's turned out to be very, it caught on in a way. There are some 1,300 citations to this obscure paper on Google Scholar, and it's been extended and opposed and parodied and carried on, but it becomes one of those defining things, and so there are many people who would oppose this idea and suggest that there are other ways to do it, and I think there are room for other patterns, but this one certainly has been a guiding one for our work, and I hope for other work as well. You've already seen tree maps. I was pleased it was mentioned in more than one talk, but our work on tree maps came from my struggle to understand what was on a hard drive and showing these nested tree structures. The most famous version you'll hear more about probably from Martin Wattenberg tomorrow. I worked with him at Smart Money in 1999, and this provides an overview of the stock market, which shows some 600 stocks in 11 industry sectors. And if you watch this over days, you'll learn something about the patterns here. The green ones are rising, the red ones are falling, and the size of each stock represents its value, its market capitalization. So here's a pretty dramatic one. Actually, today's map is not too different from this. Anybody see anything interesting here? Green one, right. Once you begin to get over past, and learn and get familiar with how to, these are not obvious what these are, how these are organized, so it takes a little bit of learning. But once you get the feel for these structures, so within the consumer staples area, there was one stock that was not just a little bit green, but it was bright green. So I clicked on that, and there's a huge mountain of data, 20-year trading history, insider trading patterns, et cetera, and it turned out to be the stock of the AMP Trading Company, which that day bought the Pathmark chain of stores, I found out, and therefore it went up 5% when everybody else was down terribly. And so it's these examples that encourage me about information visualization. So I like to say that visualizations gives you answers to questions you didn't know you had. Okay? So it just sort of leaps out at you pre-attentively, okay? Once you become familiar, that green spot, how small it is, a small feature in a large field, yet it stands out because the designers made appropriate choice of these retinal properties of color, size, shape. Other days, the pattern's a little more nuanced. Here, it was a pretty good day for energy, pretty good day for technology, but bad for financials and bad for healthcare, although one stock in healthcare was up. And of course, in the system, this is free for you to do at smartmoney.com/marketmap. You can play around with it as well. I won't bother to do the demo. If you like happier news, this is what good days look like. And then many other people put imaginative spins on this. Marcos Westcamp, a 26-year-old Argentinian, made the news map, which shows all the world's news. You can get to this for free, and it shows it in 20 countries. There are tabs for 20 countries across the top, and it organizes into topics, of international, national, technology, sports, entertainment, health, and business. So you can get to see some overview that gives you some idea of what's happening, what are the big stories, what are the less big stories, and you can compare side by side two countries to see which topics are larger in one country or another. We've worked with the Hive Group, which makes commercial versions of this, and it's become widely used for hundreds of major companies in supply chain management and process control and fraud detection and so on. We also had built in our days working with the Library of Congress, that I'm going to get to, a tree map of the Dewey Decimal System, and the area represents the number of books. In this case, the 10 components here. This was natural sciences and mathematics, technology and applied sciences. This was a specialized library which focused on physics, engineering, and allied operations and manufacturing. And the size indicates the number of books in that area. So it gives you an overview so you understand the distinctiveness of particular collections in libraries. Spotfire itself added tree maps to their tools in the past year, so that's gone further. The New York Times in 2007 began using tree maps to represent a variety of data sets. This was showing 6 variables about the automobile industry. Now, this is admittedly a print version, but Matt Erickson and his team of editors at the New York Times are just superb in packing a lot of data, and it leaves it to the point that even in the print version, there are original discoveries that each reader could make that might not have been noticed by others. And on the online versions, increasingly over the years, the Times has gotten sophisticated in its programming to give users a chance to explore the data in a way that goes beyond what the journalists could even do. So to me, the opening up and empowerment of users is really the story that is the key about information visualization. Some of the more aesthetic or creative ones are the so-called Voronoi tree maps that Michael Baltzer developed in 2007, and by 2008, I think it was, the New York Times was ready to put that in its pages among the many tree maps that they had shown. So it's great fun for me to see how ideas travel in other people's hands and emerge in unexpected ways that I never could have predicted. Okay? My final theme, before we look at some of the digital library projects, are network analysis. And this is the PhD work of Adam Perrer, a tool called Social Action to analyze social networks. In this case, it's the global terror database of 70,000 terror attacks over the last 28 years that's maintained by the University of Maryland's START lab. So it shows you many pieces of information and guides you through the process. Now, I'm going to show you one example, a 1-minute video of a famous data analysis with with Social Action. This is the voting pattern in the Senate in the 2007 year. There are 100 senators that are all shown here, and every senator is connected with a link to every other senator. The strength of the link is the number of similar votes they made. There were 330 roll call votes. The maximum similarity was 303, but, you know, they go down to much lower numbers. So as we throw this into motion here, this uses a standard algorithm to do this layout and jiggle them around so as to let the properties guide the structure. We start cutting out the 120, 130, 140, 150. Let me stop in a moment here for your laughter. But McCain, you saw, spun off because he wasn't voting enough to be linked to anybody. He wasn't similar to anybody. He was out campaigning for president. Okay? So the linkages are getting filtered out by the user here to 160, 170, 180, 190, and we get this remarkable, unbelievable, too good to be true result from this visualization. Brownback was also campaigning for president and therefore didn't connect up either. And let me stop it right here and make some observations. You can see the 2 independents, Lieberman and Sanders, vote with the Democrats. That's pretty obvious. And there are a few Democrats who are very far from the Republicans. Dodd, Biden, Kerry, Obama. What do you know? Okay? Mikulski. So you can see who's similar to the Republicans. And then you have this very interesting pattern on the Republican side. It's just a coincidence that the red Republicans are on the right. That was just too good to be true. We didn't set that up, but it's just, you know, sweeter than sweet. In the middle, you see 4 Republicans who often vote Democratic. Olympia Snowe, Susan Collins, Specter and Smith. And if you know, follow Washington politics, the stimulus bill passed in January 2009 had 3 Republican senators voting for it, 1, 2, 3. Okay? And then Arlen Specter switched from being a Republican to being a Democrat, and yesterday failed in his attempt for re-election. But you can really make this kind of visual understanding from this kind of data, which would be very difficult to find otherwise. I mean, you could do it, but the fact that this was brought to us by a journalist named Chris Wilson, who wrote about this later in Slate magazine. But, you know, we had no idea of what to expect from this. And when we produced this, he just thought we were pulling his leg and that we were, even he who should have known, just didn't realize what the structure was in this way. There's many other stories to tell about that, but I continue. We've taken the best ideas from social action and put it in a tool called NodeXL, which is free to download. It's codeplex.com, NodeXL. Let you analyze social networks. You either type your networks or cut and paste them into Excel, and then it'll draw the graph, and you can control whether it has names or colors or sizes. And the good thing about it, it has importers, as we heard today, the 140 kit. Where's Alex Levitt? Hello, there you go. That was great. I want to hear more about it. But NodeXL has an importer from Twitter as well as Flickr and YouTube and Facebook and your email. You can analyze your email as well. And all of this, you know, is a powerful tool that lets you do it. Here's what the Senate data. You can download that. It comes with the package. So you can do your own analysis of the Senate. It looks slightly different, but it's the same idea here. And then my students went to work with NodeXL and took a lot of different data sets. These are 2 that I think are fun. As part of the Open Government Directive in Washington, Obama administration released the visitors log to the White House. These students grabbed that, and these are the people visiting. This is a so-called bipartite graph. These are the people they visited. So you can see Tom Daschle, Ed Kennedy were there, and these are the number of times they visited with POTUS, the president, or, you know, different members of the staff. David Axelrod, you can see the Vice President Biden is over here. And so, again, you can explore interactively. Just, you know, this is a static image, but the dynamics of user-controlled exploration, you could filter out by whether the visitors were old or young, male or female, Republicans or Democrats, and all those things become understandable. This graph of another group of students grabbed the co-sponsorship pattern in the Senate. There's Ted Kennedy, and the arrows are all flowing into Ted Kennedy because when he sponsors a bill, many people are eager to co-sponsor. When he puts forward a bill, many are ready to co-sponsor. And the size of his logo, his image, so he proposed only a modest number. Hillary Clinton proposed more bills, but she's had fewer co-sponsors. She's not as effective in getting people to work together. The blue names are Democrats, and the red names are Republicans, so you can see the cases where Republicans are willing to co-sponsor a bill with Democrats, and often, as you'll see here, that's in exchange for the Democrat co-sponsoring a bill with the Republicans. Okay? So there's such a rich texture of the data that you can analyze using these tools. I'm short of time, so I'm just going to breeze through. This is a confrontation graph within Wikipedia. The red nodes are the individuals who produced the large amounts of confrontation. This is in the discussion of one particular article, and you can see a key figure here is Charles's bridge person there. This was a conference Twitter stream. At NYU, there was a conference on social media, and there was a feeling that the room was really 2 groups, the computer scientists and the sociologists. And indeed, when Mark Smith downloaded the Twitter stream and looked at the following network, at the follow and followers network, it turned out, yes, here were the computer scientists, here were the sociologists, there's Barry Wellman with his childhood picture, and you get an idea of who the bridge people might be in this group. This is from Flickr. You download the photos on the term mouse, and it turns out using the clustering tools, you can find that there are a set of items about computer mice, then about animals that are mice, and about Mickey Mouse. Those are the categories, and they sort out quite nicely, as you can see by the color coding here for the different words. The red ones, the blue ones, and the orange ones. This is Mark Smith's Flickr commentary network. Here's Mark Smith, a sociologist I work with, and I'm over here. I sometimes comment on his photos, but Esther Hargitay, who I met this afternoon, is very active in commenting on Mark Smith's photos. And David Silver, some of you may know, is another identifiable person. And we've been doing this for groups like the Tea Party. The Tea Party has a well-structured organization of people really working together cohesively, whereas a term like oil spill, which is a new term, has a very fragmented set of communities. Okay, so there's really patterns that we're coming to understand how to get to them and how to extract them from existing sets. And I'll just close this section. The book on this will be coming out this summer, and we're also developing a social media research foundation that will be kind of like Mozilla or Apache Foundation to keep this tool going. It's been supported by Microsoft, but we're asked to bridge out and find others to be partners in this as well. So those are the things that are my natural bounds, but I want to take you now in my minus remaining moments and some of the things that brought me and to apply these ideas to more things that may be familiar to you. We worked for several years for the Library of Congress to help establish American memory, 7 million objects on the web for people to download from the notebooks of Walt Whitman and the handwritten letters of George Washington and architectural photos of D.C. and so on. And this was our original prototype, which was based on this principle of overview first, but here we modified it, and one of our principles, especially for them, was bringing treasures to the surface. One of the things we've learned in digital humanities is that not every image, not every book, not every letter is of equal value. And some are really special, really special. And the trick for the designer is not just to provide an overview, but to bring up to the surface the really key things. And so we began to do that by adding this simple idea of photos in this introductory page. We kept a guiding navigation page. This was a quite early notion, and it's been followed by many. And then we provided these overviews that were temporal overviews for the 200 collections. They were topical overviews, formats, so if you were looking for maps or movies, you could find them, or photographs, and then location, geospatial ones. And by selecting these, you were creating an intersection, and that would produce a result set down here. Then you would click and go to that collection for the details on demand. So that was the strategy there. Here, the selections I should have shown, the time period we selected of the 1930s, history, movies, sound, photographs, manuscripts, or all the U.S., had only one document collection that was exactly relevant, the Coolidge Consumerism. And Catherine Plaisant, my colleague, loves to show this one of women tinkering with an early automobile, and she's also believing that women can be computer scientists and be strong on the technology side, too. We applied these ideas to the work of my uncle, who I mentioned. David Seymour was an important pioneering photographer, 1911 till he was killed, sadly, in 1956 while photographing at Suez for Newsweek. And this was one early site we built in 1996 for a retrospective of his work at the International Center of Photography. And it has 9 components to it. There's the overview, which remains on the screen, from his birth in 1911 to his death in 1956, and gives you an idea of the topics. Each one had a structured pattern to it. This was his early life about family, then his famous work with children in the war. This girl, Tereshka, was asked to draw a picture of a house, and she drew this scrambled look. This photo has been used by dozens of books on abnormal development and orphans and so on. It's become a sort of iconic image of the suffering child or victims of war. He also photographed personalities like Sophia Loren, I hope you can see, and here with Marilyn Monroe is him. But we get this overview, and you get to see where you are in the structure. His later years photographing Israel, and so it allows the user to explore a variety of pictures, read a variety of text, and choose their path through this. So that's the spirit, again, of giving the user the choice. You don't guide them as you do in a movie, but you let them choose their own experience. Just the past year, we've scanned 700 letters and memorabilia of his work and created a website. Here's the cover, the Shim Archive. Treasures to the Surface, his particular pictures, and then the overview, which gives you some structure. It's not as good as I'd like it to be, but this was first cut at structuring these 700 disorganized letters into categories, themes, chronology, and personalities. So if you look on the letters to or from friends, you can find letters to or from his girlfriend in Polish and French and English and all kinds of languages. And among the treasures is this wonderful letter of Ingrid Bergman. He photographed Ingrid Bergman many times with her children especially, and she wrote to him, "Dear Shim, you are a marvelous photographer, and I am a marvelous baby maker." And she signs Ingrid. Thanks and best wishes to you from Roberto Rossellini, of course. So, and by the way, this letter has the handwritten annotations of my mother, Eileen Schneiderman, that she had put on here for this letter from 1952. And so just the rich texture of the handwritten and these things make this, to me, make it quite alive. Now, for my parents who were writers, I created a website of their work, which had two parts, about their history of journalism and about the 500 books we had donated to the University of Maryland Library. So the overview tells a story about their life and the books they wrote together, and full history of their materials and their archives, which have been stored away, and a little bit about my mother, who did real fine, lived to age 96 and died in 2004, but she was a great inspiration, typing away on her computer keyboard till her end, making the 1,000 entries for the archives of their materials. And so this is about the books there. All right, so you know, that's just a few samples. I'd be glad to talk more about them, but I find those challenges particularly interesting, and right now, you know, I find returning to these humanities applications. But what I want to say to you, I appreciated the lively discussions this afternoon and hope we'll continue here, but that, you know, digital humanities designers can learn a lot from the information visualization researchers. I feel like you got that message. I was so gratified to hear so many interesting talks in the afternoon that mentioned a lot of the work in the field that I know about. I think the second one, it sort of restates the importance of what you're doing, that computer scientists can learn a lot from cultural heritage scholars. You guys present problems and challenges and novel solutions that we just never thought about. And that's why it's so satisfying to work with the likes of Tanya Clement on, her analyses of Gertrude Stein or other books. And we learn so much, and we see the challenge, and the ideas that come from those kind of text analysis projects have inspired a great deal of additional work, and I think we'll continue to do that. So I close and just remind you, come visit us. The announcements are here next Thursday and Friday. I hope you'll put these things to work. I look forward to a more clear dialogue. It's very gratifying and for me very satisfying over my life to have been part of digital humanities communities, and I thank you for the opportunity tonight. Thank you, James, and all of you. Thank you. All right.
We have time for a couple of questions.
Sure. Thank you, yes. Oh, yes, let's maybe use the microphone. Why don't you go up to the microphone, and then we can have a good face-to-face encounter.
So it's an amazing opportunity. It's amazing opportunity. It's amazing opportunity to ask you questions. I think right at the moment where this new field or paradigm of visualization humanities is just getting started. So hopefully, we will not make only mistakes, or at least we'll make our own mistakes.
That's right.
So to me, here's like maybe two questions, which, at least to me, I think maybe some of the central ones at this moment of formation. One is, so I think your message is very clear that when we think about visualization, it's not just a picture which comes at the end. It's a method of analyzing information and data. It's a method of thinking, right? So there's another term which I don't know how you feel about it, exploratory data analysis or interactive visualization. So how do we make sure that this is how people in humanities think about it? That we don't think of it as a picture, we think about it as a method, as an epistemological technology.
Well,
and then the second question, right? And then the second question, which is related.
Okay.
Very useful, exploratory data analysis. So what is the relationship in your mind between interactive visualization and statistics?
Graph visualization?
Interactive visualization and statistics.
Oh, okay. Those are both. Exploratory data analysis was the title of a book that John Tukey, the great statistician, wrote in 1977. And even before there were powerful computer tools, he really understood. I did get to meet him, I'm pleased to say, but his writings are so profound, clear about the power of visual thinking to give deeper understandings. Of course, he was talking about statistical data in general. Now, so, I think that's very much in harmony. I like to talk about discovery, but exploration is fine. Discovery sounds like you did something. Exploration may be going on for a long time. So those terms I find quite compatible. I'm not sure we can prevent the mistakes. I'm not into preventing people from making mistakes. Sometimes mistakes are very fruitful. And so people should do that. I think, let's say positively, there are lessons to be learned from his writings, from others, from our work, that I hope you'll take on. And I hope you'll find a new and fresher way to go forward. As I say, my constant amazement is ideas that are started go out in ways that I never would have expected. It's just a pleasure. Now, your second part was about interactive exploration and statistics. And I do often wind up with this distinction here and separation. My hope, and what I mentioned in the work, the social action work by Adam Perra, was the integration, that's the title of his dissertation, integrating statistics with visualization. And I really hope we can make that a clear thing. I am troubled, in part, the data mining community has gone more and more extreme towards the algorithm and avoiding the human, avoiding the process, and avoiding the visualization. When the organizers of the data mining conference last year tried to hold a special workshop called Viz Mining, they didn't get enough papers to hold the workshop. Okay? One of my few regrets professionally, I was invited to be the keynote speaker for the second of the ACM data mining conferences, and I just couldn't do it on the date they were asking for. And I don't know if I would have been able to influence it, but it, to me, is such a great opportunity. And the visualization provides you with a guidance at the beginning. It helps you understand your data, clean it up. I must say, the majority of data sets that I get have something wrong with them that the authors had no idea. I was looking at 6,400 hospital emergency room admissions, and they were analyzing these by the age of the men and the women and the age of those admitted and discharged and those who had insurance and didn't have insurance. And amongst this data set, there were 3 patients who were 999 years old, throwing their data analysis off entirely. And I have data sets of a year's worth of data, but April was missing. I mean, I have other data sets where there's 1,200 items, but 150 of them were exact repeats of another item. Somebody, in copying from one spreadsheet to another, duplicated the rows and columns. So the visualization helps you see the problems, and then it begins to help give you clues for the kind of analyses you want to do. And then I hope it's also good in making presentations. But I think, as the New York Times does, New York Times uses our tools, but then they redo them in Adobe Illustrator and make very high-quality image presentations. Is that okay, Lev? Thank you. Johanna, I can't wait.
Okay.
I'm ready.
No. Well, you're a brilliant designer, and I think everybody who knows your work, and I would include myself among them, has learned a huge amount from what you've done and what you've accomplished, and the way that you write and think. So, there's no question about that. And so my question really, though, has to do with the way we think about the notion of user.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could reflect on that a bit, because, for me, a user, the way that you show it here, is a consumer. And a consumer is somebody who has the illusion of choice that gives them a sense of empowerment within a pre-existing set of conditions that makes them feel that they have agency. But a user who's a participant is someone whose contributions and engagement actually reshape the very conditions of the system. And so I wonder if you could just reflect on that distinction.
Certainly, in this room, the choice of words is very loaded. Very careful on which words to use. And I did realize as I was going through this, the customary term in human-computer interaction is to talk about the user, which I thought you were going to go down the road of the drug taker is also the user as another critique. The term is not a good one. I mean, I often talk about, I use the explorer or seeker I've used in other times. We talk about time searcher, photo finder. We're trying to get the process of what it is the user does. The reader might be another. The word consumer, as you construed it, has, possibly weakened connotations as well. So I understand. I'm ready to hear other terms. Or, since that's a hard one to come up with, I haven't found a good term of what it is, how we operate a computer, or we steer a car, but, and we're certainly not, the thing I studiously avoid, which gets me into the battle with the AI community, computers are not our partners or collaborators or anything like that. They are merely tools with no more intelligence than a wooden pencil, is my way of seeing it. And just remember, people are not computers and computers are not people. Okay? And, we had Cynthia Braziel here, and I have a real trouble with that approach that builds computers that mimic human-style content or form. So that's maybe another argument. But I would, my fervent belief is that we're building tools that empower people. Now, at the same time, you maybe could also say visualization could be a drug. It could be a way of deception. It could be a way of misleading as well. So, what we need to do is not only empower users, but alert them to the dangers. We have to make them cautious users, readers, participants, whatever it might be. Do you want to respond? Does that give you some?
I guess,
Yeah.
go back to the microphone, but
Sure.
I guess what I'm getting at here really is the extent to which the system actually absorbs and responds to participation. In other words, if the system remains static, even though it has complexity built into it, the dynamic query systems you build are quite sophisticated, and they do allow very interesting analyses across patterns and variables and so forth. But the system itself doesn't change as a result of that.
Yeah.
Now, if we see a system where the registration of participation actually is, again, a codependent situation where what we see is that, which is what the, say, an analysts of media look very much at the way in which there's a bidirectional relationship between how media productions of concepts and demographic relations to them can be altered. I guess I'm thinking really about that circumstance and whether we can imagine an interface that would absorb, that kind of an engagement so that the system itself has a responsive capability to grow, expand, and question its own constraints.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you've hit to one of the key issues in interface design. I mean, at one end, we might have the simple design where you press the button that says go or analyze, and you get an analysis, and there's no control. At the other end, there's the unlimited power you might have through extensive programming languages and scripts, but that requires a high degree of training. So we in the design field are always looking to push the so-called end-user programming aspect out there. Now, the simple ways we do it, or we try, in almost all our tools, is to give users control over the visual display. So they could change colors, they could change shape and size, coding, and so on. Spotfire has a fairly rich set of those control panels, making it not easy to learn, but there's certainly a lot of power in there. And for those who don't have enough there, Spotfire has the so-called application programmer interface that allows professional programmers to add features to Spotfire. But that takes a lot of skill and a limited number of people. But most companies who use Spotfire do build their own additions to it and extend it along the way. That notion, of course, is what the open source movement's about. That anyone who looks at a tool like Apache or Firefox says, hey, this ought to have that feature, and it would help my work a lot. And the code is there. You can go add that feature for yourself, and it could be contributed back to the main community's code. So the notion is there And I would say admirably, I think the computing and the design community have done pretty well to try to make that possible. Not always as well as it should be, but I think that that's, it's an important issue. I think we can take some good feelings about what we've accomplished in that area. There's a lot that remains to be done. But always in our mind when we build a tool is how much flexibility are we going to give the user. Okay? So I think your issue is appropriate. Yeah, let's take, is that one more?
So I have undergraduate training in computer science, and as a computer scientist, I really appreciated your visuals. But I noticed that they all came from systems that have some kind of total data collection about them, the stock market, the White House visitors log, systems that can claim to have detailed and relatively perfect records, despite your example about the hospital data.
Right.
My other great love is women's history and African American history and gay and lesbian history. And most of my graduate training is in how do you approach the problem of sources that are missing, sources that have been erased due to power relations in history. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the challenges algorithmically of visualizing uncertainty, of visualizing missing collections or one-sided correspondence collections.
That's another important theme. I was co-chair of a National Academy of Sciences panel, which was exactly that title, Visualizing Uncertainty. Its source may amuse you, or maybe not. Maybe it'll make you pay. But in the aftermath of the invasion in Iraq, the National Security Agency was very upset that the White House had used the information about weapons of mass destruction as the premise, because they had labeled that data highly uncertain. But as it traveled through the White House, that label got removed. Okay? And so they actually asked for the study of the strategies for visualizing uncertainty. I have a whole long slide presentation about that. But there are strategies, they maybe don't get enough attention. And you're right that the tools don't quite support it. Even the most common tool, Excel, doesn't have a way of representing missing data. Spotfire and tools we built have many kinds of missing data. And the kinds of data that are missing are not random. They have systematic patterns that you want to know about as well. So certainly the topic you're promoting, another good one that I fully support. We've done some work in that. More needs to be done. But, and does it come up more in humanities than in sciences? I would say there's equal problems in NASA's data from satellites, which have lots of missing components, which the satellite data changes because the calibrations change, the instrument goes bad. It's filled with pages and pages of annotations of where things are bad or missing. As each new kind of data set gets more public scrutiny, like now electronic health records, which we're working on, they're terrible because no one's ever been able to see the problems. We have a patient who was admitted to the emergency room 14 times, discharged only twice. We know that's wrong. We know something's missing, right? But, and now that public attention is drawn to it, and with people like yourself speaking up, those particular topics will get more attention, and we'll get the ways to make those annotations and make those things more visible. It's a constant problem, and I would say the humanities people maybe have a different sort. I was turning to this page about my uncles. We spent hundreds of hours, and others also. Mark Levitch at the National Gallery. I've donated some of my uncle's work to National Gallery of Art, and they're preparing a web exhibit about my uncle's work. And he contributed amazingly. I don't know, it just was startling where, there were letters in this pile that said, "Dear David." My sister, nor I, nor all the other scholars knew what it was. He tracked it down. It was David Schoenbrun of CBS News, who my uncle had worked with during that time period, and so he knew exactly what it was. And one after another, we spent a lot of time. And here you can see our circa 1933, because we didn't know. Some of them we knew at the month, some we knew at the precision of the year, some we had the precision of the date. We tried to give whatever we could. And so, those are constant issues. They're important ones. And I would say you're right. We need to do more about how to visualize that.
Thank you.
And is there time for one more?
I think one more.
We'll take one more. Thank you.
Well, this might be not exactly a question just directed to you, but sort of a question that we can think about as a community. And I'm coming here as someone who's really not, I feel like an outlier. I'm an artist who is very new to all this stuff about digital humanities. And I was really interested, and I've been very interested in the conversations this afternoon, and very interested in your presentation. And when you got to the part about bringing treasures to the surface,
right?
it sort of made me pause, and I thought, wow, this is categorically different than looking at how many people vote for this and how many people vote for that. It's categorically different to treat information extracted from individual behaviors as data than it is to look at documents and who decides which ones are treasures?
Exactly.
Who decides, you know, which artist is to be celebrated in a particular digitization? So I guess the question is, you know, about ethics, about the politics of all of this, and it's sort of a big, vague...
Well, this is probably going to get us going for many hours from here. It was one of the topics I played with putting in there. I spent a year sabbatical working as James Billington's assistant at the Library of Congress, setting up internet policy and for the Library of Congress and working on those issues. And within that situation, I was asked to look at the Margaret Mead collection, which is 430,000 objects, okay? And the question at the time was, shall we scan it or not? Okay? And my response, which I think surprised them and was against the librarianship, and which is the spirit you're suggesting, was that it was irresponsible to scan it all. Okay? And that the way forward, and this is something I do say to the humanities community, this may get me into trouble here, if I'm not in trouble already, is that I would like to encourage you to have a little more courage, I would call it, to make those decisions and to put your name next to it and to say, I think this one's important. It's the spirit of the tagging, and the Steve Museum folksonomies and tagging of museum objects follow that spirit as well. I would like them to be identified with the person who did the tagging. Now, within the Library of Congress, their mindset as librarians is not to make distinctions, and that we don't decide what's a treasure or not. So I began to look through the Library of Congress system, and there were some ways in which they did. For example, twice a year, the exhibits division prepares an exhibit of some kind. They make choices from the Margaret Mead collection. They had a Margaret Mead, and they choose certain things that are really important, that present a certain point of view. Maybe controversial, that's okay, but the people who made the choice, the curators, get to stand up proud and deal with the complaints about what they chose as important. Okay? And that was one. That was an easy one. Sometimes they have to make decisions, and they will constitute an external board of professionals in the area, which they will get to do those things. Sometimes they could find subsets that were more attractive. In that case, Margaret Mead's letters, handwritten letters from 31 through 33 from Samoa, were a subset that they said, we could scan all of those, that would be good. So they could see that that one was particularly juicy. It was a relevant time. She's known for that work and for her books. And so that was a particularly attractive one. So they could make a focus based on media, but not content. Well, a little bit on content. So we developed a set of strategies which I hoped enabled them. Now, this is particularly important for you. I would just like to make the other reason this issue is important is because we live in a finite budget of time and money. When I have a colleague who says, oh, I found these fantastic resources, we have to find the money to scan it all. And I said to him, well, who is going to be the user? How often, how valuable is this? Do you have to scan it all, or could you select from them? And sometimes, I know humanities people do suffer from less funding than other fields, but that doesn't change the game. You still need to make those priority judgments, I would say, and put your name on that and let them know who made the judgment. Be courageous, I would say, and make the judgment, and then you can decide how to allocate whatever resources you have. And also the process of gathering other people who say, yes, it's important to do this one, is another effective social process in the community. You want to respond to that?
You know, that's a great response. I think I feel like part of the process of coming to those decisions, I mean, yes, it takes courage, and it also takes continuing to ask the question,
right.
Who gets to decide?
Right.
Who's at the table to decide what are the treasures?
That's right.
So it's the
and,
politics.
You know, you can, if you're uncomfortable, you can put a 2-year limit on it and have it reviewed in 2 years. There's a lot of ways you can soften this absolute notion and make it easier. You can include other people, opposing voices, or a community of people. But I think for this field to progress, one of the things that would be very helpful would be encouraging that process of selection and prioritizing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.